Welcome to Ground Control, and I thought it was time to provide you with information on using our aircraft setup and OpenTX model files. This aircraft will be the next one, assuming everything goes well, will be the next one that I provide that information on. The setup files that I provide, and as far as I'm aware, I'm the only one that does this. I don't know of anyone else that provides complete information on getting one of these aircraft set up. So today we're going to go over the setup files that I provide on all the aircraft that I get up and I get set up and flying exactly the way I want. I call it my golden setup. So as soon as I get an aircraft set up and flying and handling the way I want it to, shortly after that I will publish my setup file, and then as a convenience I also upload and provide my OpenTX model file for that aircraft. The setup files and the OpenTX model files are published on our Facebook page. So we're going to go to the computer in a couple of minutes here, and I'm going to go through how you can search our Facebook page to find the setup and OpenTX model files for a particular aircraft that we've published. As the title says, every time that you use one of these setup files to set up your aircraft, you will have a successful launch, maiden launch, and a successful maiden flight. And then you can tweak the setup from that point to match your flying style. With the setup files that I provide and the information that is in those files, I have never been sent a factory plane that had all that information in the manual. I have never purchased a factory plane that had all that information in the manual. I don't know why, but they just don't provide it. The setup file is going to be a PDF file that you can download, so you need a PDF viewer for that document. The OpenTX model file, with most of the latest ones that I've published, I published the OpenTX model file and an image file of the aircraft that I use in my TX16S. So it's a zip file. So if you don't know how to manage archive files, there is a link in the show notes for people using Windows systems. It's an open source and free archiving utility. If you don't know how to use an archiving utility, there's plenty of documentation on their website for that. There's also a link in the show notes for OpenTX Companion or EdgeTX Companion, depending on whether you're using OpenTX or EdgeTX. Both of those companion softwares will be able to import the OpenTX model file. I will show you how to search for that information on our Facebook page, how to download it to your computer. We'll unpack the zip archive. I'll show you where you need to copy the image file to your transmitter. I'll show you how to import the file into the OpenTX Companion software, the changes that you will need to make to the OpenTX model file after you import it before you write it back to your transmitter. And we will go over all the information that is in the setup file. Okay, so I'll meet you at the computer.
Okay, so first off, let's go to the Ground Control RC Facebook page and search for the Hobby King Hawker Hurricane setup and OpenTX model file. So I only have one Hurricane, so Hurricane setup file. Okay, and there it is, my setup and OpenTX model file for the Hobby King Hawker Hurricane 750mm Warbird. So that gives us a setup file. Most of the time I will publish my setup and OpenTX model files at the same time. But every once in a while I may publish the setup file and the OpenTX model file separately because I don't have them ready to go at the exact same time. So if we go over here and change the search criteria to OpenTX model file, and once again that post comes to the top. So show more, and then here is the link to the setup file. Here is the link to the OpenTX model file. So if we select the setup file first, it'll open up the PDF file on my Google Drive. Go ahead and follow the link. And there's the setup file in a PDF as a PDF file. So let's go ahead and we'll download it. And I'm going to download it to my aircraft folder for the Hobby King Hawker Hurricane setup files. So I'm going to save it there. Okay, we can close out that tab and then go to the OpenTX Model File link. Follow the link again. Okay, now you can see there's the OpenTX Model File and also the Hawker Hurricane model image file. So this is a zip file, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to select to download it. We're going to download it in the same folder. Okay, so now that we have those files downloaded, we can go ahead and close out that tab. Bring up the file manager. Okay, and so there's the PDF file and the zip file. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and extract it here and open that folder, and there's the OpenTX model file, and there is the Hawker Hurricane image file for your transmitter. All right, so I am going to hook up my transmitter. All right, and the first thing I want to do is I want to copy the image file to my transmitter. So I'm going to copy that and then bring up my folder on the TX16S where the image folder is, and then I could drop that file in there. And as you can see, I've already got that file installed on the transmitter, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that. We'll back out of that, but that's where you would copy and paste that image file. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up OpenTX Companion. And I'm going to read the model and settings from the radio. Okay, so there's all my model files in my radio. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the Hobby King Hurricane OpenTX model file where we dropped it off. There it is. Okay, and so there's the Hobby King Hurricane with the gyro. So I already have that in my transmitter. So I'm going to show you how to do this. I want to rename this. So we'll call it 1. So I'm not copying over my existing model files. So I'll highlight that, right click it, say copy one model file, go to models, paste that model file, and there it is. And then what I would do is I would write that. I'm not going to do it because they're already there, but then you would go in and write models and settings to your radio once you're ready to do that. But there's some things in the I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And I'm going to bring up the Hobby King Hawker Hurricane file because there's some things in here I want to show you that you're going to need to change. Now, as you can see, the protocol that I'm using is Radio Link Subprotocol Air. I want to go to the inputs, and you can see the inputs here. The gyro configuration is already in there. But I want you to see here the channel order. Aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder. So the first thing you're going to need to do is look at the channel order, because on my setup, I disable channel map on all my models. I put the channels in the proper order for the protocol I'm using. So if the protocol you're using has the channels in the same order, aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder, then you're good to go. If not, then you're going to want to reorder these channels so that the channels are in the proper order for the protocol you're using. Like if you're using DSM2, DSMX, then instead of having the throttle on channel 3, the throttle will be on channel 1. So you'll want to move your throttle to channel 1, your elevator to channel 3, and the aileron to channel 2. It'll be throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder. Okay, just make sure that you have those in the proper order before you power up your plane. You don't want your motor to automatically spin up on you because it's not on the throttle channel. Okay, so the next thing I want you to see is the outputs here, and you see the sub trim. Everybody's sub trim is going to be different than mine. This is the sub trim that I had to put in to center up my servos. Your servos are going to require a different sub trim than mine has. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to zero all these out and then input your own sub trim to center up your servos. So right here, just put in 0, right? Put in 0, put in 0, put in 0, and you're good to go. All right, so logical switches. This is where I have my timer set up. Okay, so L01 is my timer. So what this is saying is if A is greater than X, in other words, if the throttle is higher than minus 99, on the throttle, I want the timer to start. The timer only runs when I'm inputting throttle. My throttle is set on channel 3. Yours may be different, so you'll need to modify that here if it's different. I have it set up so that the throttle timer will only work if the throttle is above minus 99 and switch SF is in the forward position. You may want to have that set up on a different switch. I use switch SF as my throttle safety switch. You may want to use a different switch. This is another thing that you will need to change if you're using a different switch. So now let's go to special functions. So right here is where I have my throttle safety switch defined. SF switch is in the back position. It's going to override channel 3, which is my throttle. It's going to override it with a value of minus 100. So as long as the SF switch is in the back position, I can put my throttle stick anywhere I want, and it will not engage the throttle. Okay, and then here's my timer on my timer reset on the SH switch, which is my momentary switch. So if I flip my momentary switch forward, it'll reset my timer back to 0. Okay, so those are the things that you guys need to be aware of when you import our OpenTX model files. So be aware of that. I just want to make sure that you get everything set up the way you need it for your protocol and for your switches and for your channels before you ever power up your plane with this model file. That's what you need to know there. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I'm not going to write that to my transmitter because I already have it in there. Okay, so now that we've looked at downloading and importing the OpenTX model file and using it for yourself, copying the aircraft image file over to the transmitter. Now I want to take a look at the setup file for that. So let's go back over here to the folder where we dropped off our setup files for the Hawker Hurricane. Okay, now here's our setup file. It's a single PDF file. So I want to show you everything that is in this setup file. Okay, so at the top, the title shows you it's the Hobby King Hawker Hurricane 750mm plug-and-fly warbird. Okay, now I have some important information in here in the notes. Okay, so I give you my description of what I think about the plane. I'm telling you here the protocol that I'm using, so you'll know. If you choose to use the OpenTX model file, you'll know if I'm using a protocol that has a different channel order than what you're going to be using. Okay, so that will make you aware of that. I'm giving you information here on my flight battery, how much it weighs, how much flight time I can get out of this model the way I fly it with 3.6 volts left per cell. I also want you to know that I had to add 17.5 grams of nose ballast weight to this plane to get the CG at 45 millimeters with a neutral balance. I also replaced the stock Orange RX gyro from Hobby King with the Radio Link by MA gyro. So I want to make you aware of that because My gyro programming is going to be a little different than yours will be if you use the stock gyro. I also recommend, because this plane has a very effective rudder, I recommend that you install your rudder linkage in the outermost hole of the control horn. I have mine in the middle, but I use very little rudder. I need very little rudder in the turns, but I have a lot of rudder movement on this plane for doing stall turns. So until you get used to the sensitivity of the rudder on this plane, the effectiveness of the rudder, I would recommend that you put the linkage in the outermost hole to begin with. Okay? So that's why, another reason why I think these setup files are very valuable information, because not only do I give you all my setup information to have the plane set up so it will fly exactly the way you see in the flight video, but other information that I think is very important for you as well. All right, so, and then all the control linkage on the aileron control horn, the servo arm, the elevator control horn, servo arm, rudder, everything is listed for you exactly how I have my linkage set up. And the way I have my linkage set up allows me to have 100% dual rate on all the control surfaces, which makes the controls very smooth, and it gives me enough movement on the control surfaces that it's very aerobatic. So I think that's a really good setup to start with, especially for your maiden flight. This setup for this plane, if you do everything that I did here, you know, with the nose ballast weight where I have my CG, you're going to have a very successful launch, and you're going to have a very successful maiden flight. Now, I always like people to know that when I measure my deflection, I measure it as close to the control horns as possible. So I'm measuring the deflection of the control surface opposite of the control horn. And as you can see, my dual rates are all set at 100%. My expo settings for aileron, elevator, and rudder, and the amount of control surface movement I have up and down for aileron and elevator, and left to right for the rudder. Now, if you put your rudder in the outermost hole as I suggested, then you're probably going to be getting quite a bit less movement left to right on your, or at least you should get quite a bit movement less in your rudder from left to right. It might be somewhere around 18 to 20 millimeters instead of 25 millimeters. But it will make it less sensitive when you use it. And here's where I list my CG location. In the CG that's specified in the manual is 45 to 50 millimeters. Now, I did conduct a flight with the CG at 50 millimeters back from leading edge of the wing at the fuselage. But to me, that still felt like it was just slightly tail heavy. Getting that CG moved to 45 millimeters back from the leading edge of the wing at the fuselage with the neutral balance feels very, very good on its balance. It feels very good in the air. And when I perform a roll, it's nice and it's tight and it's axial, which tells me that the balance and the trim setup is pretty good. And I even give you my launch throttle. You don't want to launch a plane with too little throttle so that it stalls on you when you launch it. You don't want to launch a plane with too much throttle to where it has a bunch of torque roll when you release it. So the launch throttle that I publish on my setup files is the launch throttle that I use that provides enough thrust to have a nice takeoff with a hand launch without so much that it creates torque roll. And at 60% throttle, this plane takes off very nicely with a moderate chuck and produces very minimal torque roll, which is why I published that. So with all this information that I'm giving you on these setup files, should give you a successful maiden launch and a successful maiden flight. Anyway, I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. I've had quite a few questions about the setup files and especially the OpenTX model files. I hope that answers your questions. The setup file is really all anyone needs to get their plane set up and flying exactly the way I have mine set up and flying. The OpenTX model file is just a convenience for those that have multi-protocol transmitters that are using OpenTX or EdgeTX. It's just a convenient way of you being able to get the programming imported in your transmitter without having to do it from scratch. So, like I said, I'm the only one that I know of that provides this information. So I hope you guys find it very useful. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the air.